Hello, it's me, Jay, your GM. I use he, them.
Hello, I'm Air. I use he, him.
And this is some more DM advice, I guess you could say, sort of. This is, what we're going to do today is we're going to just do a quick overview of things we would like to see. Our D&D 24 wish list. We're pretty deep in the playtest now. I mean, I imagine we're very close to the end of the playtest. Very closer perhaps than I even thought we were. They released a tweet which said something about the 2024 core rulebook coming May 21st. And if that is the case, then, you know, January, February, March, April, May, that's 5 months from now. We really can't change too much more, right?
Before it needs to hit print. Yeah, it was at the bottom of a piece of art.
Yeah.
And then it was scrubbed from that piece of art. So it's kind of, you know, speculative as to if that's the date, but it feels
I'll post that for I'll put that on screen for the viewers at home here. So we're seeing D&D 2024 core rulebooks releasing 5/21/2024. So very, I would say very strong evidence that potentially that date is at least something they're aiming for internally, or were aiming for around the time of PAX Unplugged, because the promo images from that. With that known, I mean, you think about the fact that they've got to send it off to the printers, got to have it printed, got to have it, got to have the printing reviewed, got to have that printing approved, and then it's got to be mailed from wherever their printers are located to their many warehouses in America, distributors, vendors, etc. We really cannot have very much time, if any, left for testing. Which means that our wish list, so what we see in the rules feels like it's probably pretty close to final at this point. And of course, this is all assuming that leak was true in the first place. Wires could have been crossed, who knows. Generally speaking, I think historically they have released November. And in an interview, Crawford did say that the books are going to come out staggered release because their printers begged them not to release them all at once for fear of having to fulfill that much demand all at once. Things that I think we will get based on what we've seen in the UA, stuff like that. These are the things that I'm pretty sure we're going to get in some form or another. Number one is spell rebalance. I don't think you would disagree with me that there are the worst spells in 5th edition are in the PHB.
Definitely some of the most egregious. Yeah, I mean, they're the ones that are the oldest, and thus they've had the least, you know, iteration in spell design. So yeah, they definitely the outlier in being too good are definitely some of those PHB spells.
Yeah, so we see things like the conjure spells, which recently got a strong revision. We also see things like Wall of Force, Force Cage, Hypnotic Pattern, these sorts of spells, which can kind of be overly strong for their level and be very problematic in play, tend to come from the PHB because, like you said, it's the first thing they made, so they didn't know how to make the game yet. It's very true. Like, one of the earliest adventures we have is Out of the Abyss, and the encounters aren't balanced. Like, famously, they're not balanced because they didn't know how to balance encounters quite yet. So yeah, it's not a surprise that the PHB has some problems, but it is a major problem because the PHB is the one book that basically every table allows, right? Like, your DM may cut off Tasha's, they may cut off Xanathar's, they may cut off Matthew Critical Role's stuff, but everybody's got to allow the PHB, and the PHB has the worst spells in it. Pretty rough.
Yeah, I remember trying to run the first bit of Horde of the Dragon Queen, Greenest in Flames, and like it took to heart the whole idea of like, what is it, like 8 encounters a day or whatever? Like there are 8 combat encounters in that one night of adventure, and it's like, no, your first level players will die. It will just get smoked. Like, I kind of gave up on it because of that. And so there's definitely been a lot of iteration in, you know, the design of 5th edition since then, and the spells are no exception.
When I first made this video by myself, this is one of the parts that I kind of ranted on for way too long. but at the same time, I do think is really pertinent. My second wish is improved DMG. And what I mean by that is the first section of the DMG is a world of your own. It is creating a world. The second is creating a multiverse. Then the third is creating an adventure. And the fourth is creating NPCs. I feel like that's almost in the opposite order that it should be.
Absolutely.
Like, I mean, if you're talking about a new GM, a new person to the game, a new person who's never played before, like, I don't think the first thing you want to tell them that they need to do to run D&D is create a world. A map, factions, deciding what magic's like, creating a campaign, the big picture, a pantheon. Is that the first task we want to tell DMs they have to do? That seems a little overwhelming. And then I think one of the most frustrating things I find so often is we see time and time and time again YouTubers who post these videos like, great rules in the DMG that you didn't know existed. Where it's like, oh, this thing that like I always have to homebrew in my home game is actually in the DMG. It's just hidden in chapter 8 for some bizarre reason. Diseases, poisons, siege equipment, chases, combat, objects, social interaction. All these rules are in chapter 8 running the game. That should be chapter 1. Like, that should be the first thing you see is all these useful house rules and optional rules that make the game tailored towards one kind of experience or another. And it's chapter 8. Bizarre. I mean, if we think about like user-facing design, right? Like, how do we organize things for how people actually are going to interact with them, right? One of the first things you see in the player's handbook is a section on how to create a character. Because that's what you're always going to be doing when you're using the PHP. If we're talking realistically, how often is a DM going to be creating a world? How often are they going to be creating a pantheon? If we're talking about ordering things in the amount that they're actually, like, that page is needed, that should be at the end.
Yeah. Creating, world, civilizations, cosmologies. Yeah. Those things are like, for level 1, we're going to go fight some goblins. Like, yeah.
They are something that some DMs are going to need, and having some advice there is good, but not the first chapter. That's goofy. So I definitely think and they've expressed this in the interviews and stuff like that they're going to go into the DMG and reorganize it. So this is why it's in the first section. But yeah, it's definitely needed. And it's kind of funny because I think famously the 4th edition DMG is like really exceptional for actually running the game. It's just that it ran a bad game. So let's go down to the monster manual and improved monsters. This is another one I think we're going to get. And I think we're going to get this one because we've been getting monsters. Like I think monsters are one of the best. Like, if you're interested in designing games and, like, interested in the process of design, I think watching the evolution of monsters through 5th edition and how they have, like, changed with each monster book is one of the best, clearest insights to the changing philosophies inside Wizards of the Coast. Because that first book it's just giants with, like, multi-attack and a rock. And they have different amounts of hit points, and like 2 different kinds of giants have some like minor spell casting, non-combat spells, but like a little bit of spell casting for flavorful stuff. But it is multi-attack and a rock. And I would say that maybe 75% of the monster manual monsters, I'm willing to go that far, are multi-attack and maybe a ranged attack option. Like, almost all of them are varying amounts of hit points, armor class, a multi-attack, and a ranged attack option. And then you get Xanathars, and Xanathar's monsters have a little bit more going on. And then you get, oh my god, the Magic the Gathering books, where they're trying to capture the flavor of these really complex cards into a monster stat block. You get really interesting monsters that have really cool powers. And then from there, you follow that to Tasha's and Fizzban's, the Giants book that just came out. All of these books have more and more complex and interesting monsters. And very recently, we got another look at the upcoming, with Monsters of the Multiverse, which really gave us some interesting changes. Specifically, it gave us getting rid of legendary actions and switching that out for more reactions. Yeah. So yeah, I think monsters really are like evolving, so I'm confident that they're going to be changed, but they need to be changed.
Well, definitely, because like there's holes in like the CR where certain creatures, like we've seen with the problem with like the wild shaping druid, like the beasts that they have as they go up in CR, they don't really tend to get all that much better in terms of their stats. The scaling is way off, and that's just one example. We know we definitely have heard of, like, you know, in high level campaigns for those tables that do play in the high level campaigns, even like, you know, CR 20 something creatures, you know, god level creatures aren't challenging these groups. So seeing that readjustment is going to be good.
I have definitely sent CR 20s at level 10 parties, and I have sent CR 20s at level like 15 parties, and they've been fine. Because, yeah, like you said, they just don't hit right. Things I would like to get, but I'm not so sure on. The exhaustion rules from earlier in the playtest. I thought they were great. Simple -1 per level of exhaustion. If you get to 10, you die. The current exhaustion rules are quite complicated. If you ever get exhaustion, you basically have to go look it up because there's no reason to memorize it because it comes up very rarely. But at the same time, it's quite a complicated set of rules because I think first level of exhaustion is disadvantage on just ability checks, but not saving throws or attacks. And then level 2 is like halved movement or something, or maybe that's level 4. I don't know. It's very specific and it's very arbitrary almost. Like each level is something completely different that really gets progressively quite bad. And a simple like, oh, I have 2 levels of exhaustion, I do -2 on everything. Easy, simple, nice and breezy. I would love. I don't know why they've moved back away from it. I don't know why they've dropped it out. My hope is that they just got the feedback they needed and were like, we don't need to fill every single playtest with this junk because we know what we want to do with it. But it's possible they just dropped it.
Yeah, I'm worried they dropped it because normally the rules glossary, they just kept everything in there, and when something disappeared, it was kind of like, well, why? But yeah, like I know
this was unfortunately before they started putting in those design notes about why they were taking stuff out too.
I definitely feel that, like, I know 5e's design, they wanted to move away from floating modifiers, so because it made things so complicated when you had a +1 from this and a -2 from this and blah, 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 blah. But if you don't have a system with a lot of floating modifiers because of advantage, having one instance or a few instances isn't that bad. And in fact, in this instance, it's more elegant than the, you know, status changes that happen with every level of exhaustion that no one can remember. So yeah, stick with it, please.
And I also, I somewhat chafe against the term floating modifier for this because it is very specifically a condition, and it is a condition where the number is going to be pretty apparent as part of the condition. Like, how many levels of exhaustion do you have? Yeah, how many levels of exhaustion do you have? 3. What's the modifier? 3. It's very straightforward. So it's not quite as, like, with the modifiers, it's like, oh, is this enemy an orc? Then I get a -2 or a +2 or something like that. That's very arbitrary, but this feels very elegant and internally consistent and simple. So I do hope that I hope that they just got the info they needed and were like, well, we don't want to put this giant block of text in every single PDF going forward.
The other thing is, I think most players are using D&D Beyond now. I get the sense it's pretty ubiquitous at this point. And there you go. You set a level of, you know, exhaustion. It just -1s all of your numbers for you.
I do understand why WotC doesn't want to get in the habit of designing assuming people are using D&D Beyond, though. I can definitely understand that. Even if the reality on the ground is that most everybody does have access to it in some way or another. I think if it would be a bad habit to get into, I think, generally. Digital tools to level up monsters. This is something that D&D Beyond actually said it was working on very early on when it was under different management. And this is a tool that I think would make the encounter builder go from like a decent product to a must-have product. Because if you could just take a CR 1/4 monster and just like click a drop down and say, hey, I need this to be a CR 6 monster, and it just added what it needed to add to make those numbers work, I think that would be a killer app. And we had a tool like this in 4th edition, actually. they had something called the Monster Vault, or the GM's Vault, that lets you move a monster's CR up and down, and it would just do the math that they had sort of set up internally to adjust that monster on the fly. And God, what a killer app that would be for D&D Beyond, because so many sessions, I want to use a monster, but it's not quite strong enough, but I don't want to use 2 of that monster because that'll be too strong. So it's just like, I just need to bump this guy up a little bit, and I don't want to go into the stat block and homebrew a whole new stat block just to rank this guy up a little bit. But yeah, God, that would be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a totally killer app.
Mm-hmm. Things I want that I doubt we get. So these are things that I would like to see, but I'm not so sure are going to actually materialize. And sadly, the first, I think, is shield spell nerf.
But I want it.
I do want it too, yeah. But so here's the thing, right? People love the shield spell. And I worry, like, we've seen them take on spells that people love. I mean, we've seen them take on counterspell, for example. So we've seen them take on spells that people love. But I do worry that shield might be a step too far for them. Like, we haven't seen it in any of the playtests. It's a first level spell, so it's one of the ones that feels like it would have been fairly easy to have included so far. And unlike other more problematic spells like Force Cage and Force Wall, which are high level spells and thus less often used, shield is sort of a cornerstone of the game, like Counterspell is. You think that it would have been included with Counterspell if it were going to actually be changed. I'm just getting a little worried that we're not going to see shield spell.
The other thing that we're seeing is like the shield spell, getting back to why it's problematic with those super high ACs, is coming in with those, multi-class Gish builds. That's what's really problematic, because it works on top of whatever your AC is, even if you're wearing a set of armor and a shield. And, that was problematic, but it still required multi-classing. Most of the tables I play at allow multi-classing, but if you don't, it's less problematic. It's a much higher feat cost in 5e currently to get light and then probably medium armor if you really wanted to do that on a character with shield. But now that they've combined light and medium armor proficiency into a single feat that you can pick up at first level, and you get a feat in your background, it makes it very easy for any caster with shield to grab those armor proficiencies and have that problem going right from level 1. The
opportunity cost is almost 0 now.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's and here's the thing, right? We talk about the martial caster divide. A martial can never cast shield. I mean, that's not true, but it's true. A martial inherently does not. There's no martial with the shield spell. Maybe one of the paladins sometimes, I don't know. But generally speaking, as a rule, a fighter's never going to be able to cast shield. And so the maximum armor class a fighter gets comes from their armor. Whereas a wizard has all the access to that armor that the fighter has, and has access to shield. So it is a way in which the wizard exceeds the martial in the thing that ostensibly the martial should be the best at. The martial who can dip into cleric, the cleric who just gets it naturally, the artificer who gets it naturally, or the wizard who dips into artificer. These are all very simple ways, 1 level dip that doesn't even set you back in spellcasting, that gives you 20th level or 9th level spells at level 20, just like you would normally have, and it gives you an AC that martials simply can't match, and that's bad. That's bad for the game. It's bad for the game in my opinion.
Yep, agreed. 100%.
But the shield spell is good for the game. Like, a wizard who has a 12 armor class should have a way to bump up to 17 for 1 round at a high opportunity cost of one of their limited daily resources, a spell set.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It's just that there needs to be something that when they're wearing armor, when they're holding a shield, can't also benefit from this other benefit. Yeah. Weapon mastery on monk. I just think it would be neat. There's not a lot to this one.
The martial class. It was supposed to be the martial class thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the monk is good now. I think our last video we kind of expressed some hesitancy about the monk. That since then we've talked more about it. We've listened to other people talk more about it, and I think it's like clear that the monk is in actually an okay place right now, and doesn't need weapon mastery, but it should have it. It should just have it. It should just be an option. I'm sure they can get it through a feat or something like that, but they should just have it.
Or, you know, one level fighter dip or whatever. It strikes me as like they didn't want to put in the work to change open hand, which has a lot of features that mimic the effects of various weapon masteries. So they just kind of took it from them. But no, I want my monk to do cool shit with their weapons when they're using weapons.
Improvements to death and dying. So, I think one of the most common complaints we get about 5th edition is how meaningless death becomes fairly early on. Once you get access to the Revivify spell, you can basically always bring someone back. It's no longer a problem. Death is never really a concern. Parties will cordon off what little gold you give them, hoard it to have 300 GP, make sure they always have a diamond in stock, and then at that point, death is never a concern. And I don't think that that's healthy for the game. I don't think it's good for the community. I don't think it's good for, I just think it's bad in general. I think that there should be a more interesting consequence to death, or there should be some way of making death a little more likely to stick. So I just like to see that. In the older editions, we had a very brutal punishment on death where you had to roll, and if you did badly, your constitution, I think every time you were brought back, your constitution went down. And eventually, if your constitution hit 0, you would just never be able to be brought back again. I don't think we should go that far, but I do think it would be interesting if there were some sort of lasting penalty. So say somebody casts Revivify, maybe your max HP goes down for a period of time afterwards. And so you're like slightly more likely to go back down, like you're more frail and vulnerable, something like that, just to give a little bit more of a payoff to dying. Even if it's just like a narrative, like you acquire a scar and blah 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 blah. You can go in and determine what that is, some sort of lasting mark of the injury, whatever. As long as there's something a little more meaty to chew on about death and dying, I think it would be good for the game. This next one is a bit weird. In the original PHB, there are rules for mixed successes, which is strange because I don't know anybody who plays 5th edition with mixed successes. And so basically, this one is just like either shit or get off the pot. Like either make mixed successes an actual part of the game or don't include those rules in the next PHB. What are we doing with this? Like, what are we doing with this suggestion that, like, success doesn't have to be a binary. It can also be, like, there can be a failure that progresses the story, so mixed success and stuff like that. It's like, well, that's a great sentiment, but almost half the classes now have abilities that trigger when you fail a check, or abilities that trigger when you succeed a check. And so, how do those interact with a mixed success? There's no rules for that because the game doesn't actually expect you to be using mixed successes. So why is it in the PHB? I think that rule is unnecessary, or I think it would actually be kind of cool if they did like lean into this a little bit more. If they did kind of have graduated tiers of success, if they wanted to put in the muscle and the work to make it actually make sense, I think that would be kind of neat. But it needs to actually be a thing, or it needs to not be in the game. Like, it's this weird half state is bizarre.
It's true. I mean, I'm a huge Powered by the Apocalypse fan, and that system at its core is about, the most likely result being the fail forward result, where you do make progress, but there is some sort of cost associated with it. And it's always a favorite of mine. It keeps the DM on their toes. It keeps things interesting when they have to adjudicate, as opposed to a binary. Either you do the thing you set out to do, or you don't, and then what?
This last one is really, I don't think, going to happen, but it's one I think that should happen. And I think if WotC were independent of Hasbro, it's possible it could happen. And I think if Hasbro were a forward-thinking company that actually had any initiative and looked at the marketplace as a whole and made decisions based on what was best for the hobby, it would happen. But because neither of those things is true, I don't think it's going to happen. But I think they should expand the SRD. And here's my argument for that. Though I don't know that I have to convince you, Air. But I think they should expand the SRD to include all subclasses from the PHB. And here's why. Pathfinder does it. Pathfinder exists, and in Pathfinder, every single class in that game is available for free online. Every single class. You don't have to buy a single book. You can play everything in that game right now, free of charge. Pathfinder 2. Blades in the Dark, every single job playbook is online. Lancer, every single mech is online, free of charge. Icon, every single, that whole book is online, free of charge. These games exist. They are direct competitors to D&D, and they are better for consumers. And if you want to be the leader in the industry, you should be the most egalitarian, or at the very least, you should be setting an example that you're not following behind, but that you are leading the charge. And in here, clearly D&D has a huge buy-in. And even if you put all this stuff up online and allow people to have access to it, there's still plenty of reason to buy these books. Expanded spell lists, more options in feats, more options in races and ancestries, things like that, which grant, so there's still reasons to buy them, even if it's just like more rules, more interesting like variant rules, things like that. But this is a way to onboard new players. This is a way to get that new audience in. Let them try 3 or 4 different classes, you know? What if they I want to play the healer. Okay, well, here's Life Cleric, the most boring cleric. This doesn't really look like what I want to do. And it's like, oh, well, that's the one you get. Have fun. You know, if you don't like it, screw off. Or, you know, like, Fighter, here's Champion Fighter. Oh boy, it has no features. I mean, the new Champion Fighter in D&D 24 is a lot more interesting than the old Champion Fighter was. But I just think, like, letting basically the most boring subclass of every class be the first look everyone gets at D&D is not the example you want to set. It's not how you want to introduce this game to people. And other games have proven that your audience will still buy these books just to have them, just to reference them, for integration into digital tools, for all sorts of reasons. They will still pay for these books, even if you provide this stuff for free. But it just makes people look at you and go, oh, they're not pieces of shit. They're pretty cool. That's a nice thing for them to do. It's a consumer-friendly thing for them to do. And you know what? They could use the win.
I was going to say, in light of what's happened over the past year with kind of unforced errors in public relations between WotC and the D&D fan base, you could use some goodwill, guys.
Yeah.
You could use some goodwill.
Yeah, I just think that this is such an easy win, and such a, like, really true consumer-friendly action. And I doubt we're gonna get it, because there's really no indication that WotC would take this path, but it would be good. It would just be good.
Yeah.
Just be good.
I agree with you that if you put it in the SRD, people will still buy the books. And like the rise of digital, like the selling point for something like D&D Beyond from the player perspective is, look how easy and quick it is to make a character with these digital tools, as opposed to sitting down with pencil, paper, and either a PDF or a hardcover PHP or whatever. Like that's the buy-in for it. So you've still got plenty of avenues. Just put it out there.
Yeah, and if you want to, like, hold back, I don't know, level 4 and beyond feats, if you want to just make level 1 feats SRD and then level 4 and beyond feats not SRD, if you want to, like, only offer a smaller subsection of the ancestries, lineage, species, whatever they're calling them, that's all, in my opinion, fine. You know, it's not the best, but it's fine. Just giving people access to the classes gives them more room to make the character that sparks their imagination and gets them hooked on the game for life.
Absolutely.
I that's everything I've got in my list for things I would like to see out of D&D 24.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I didn't add much to the list. I didn't add anything to the list because you really, you hit it on the head for everything I'm looking for. Like I'm super enthused at the changes I've seen. I really wanted to see the Marshall Caster divide addressed, and we've seen Marshals get buffed, and we've started to see a lot of problematic, PHB spells get retuned. I am excited to see as we get into this new year now, as they're moving away from the PHB, to see some of the redone monster design for the monster manual. And all that as it's kind of coming our way this year. But yeah, I think we've really covered all the things, at where we're at in the playtests right now, and kind of, hopes and dreams.
Yeah, I would say I'm right there with you on the playtest, where I really feel like the direction that they're generally heading has been very positive and very good. And I think that's why I can sit here and get a little bit greedy about things I want in the next edition, things that maybe are a little bit further of a stretch. Because I feel like, by all accounts, by what it looks like, they're really listening. And so, why not speak my mind? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for joining me to talk about our hopes and dreams for D&D 24. It won't be very much longer now. I'm so excited to start actually playing with these new rules, seeing the final versions. And it'll be nice to see everything coalesced in a final version together, because right now it's very difficult to actually sort of get the whole picture, because everything is very piecemeal between the documents, and a lot of stuff just simply isn't going to be how it was. Like, Bard's final version is not going to be anything like the Bard in the actual book, because there's so many things that changed after Bard was settled, so to speak. So yeah, there's going to be like Bard, we kind of don't know what its final form actually looks like, despite playtesting it twice, I think. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to getting the final books in our hands and really taking a deep dive look into everything. But from everything I've seen so far, I have every reason to be hopeful that it's going to be a really positive change for the game.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're on the right course. Just
stick
please
to
don't let your
landing.
corporation fuck it up. Yeah.
Don't fuck it up is the true way of expressing it.
Stick the landing hardworking game designers. Yeah.
Stick the landing is the public relations way of saying it.
Exactly. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all for tuning in. Hope you have a good one, and goodbye.